day I signed the papers, my hands were shaking. Not from nerves. I'd run Hartley Home Interiors for 23 years. I'd negotiated with contractors who tried to shortchange me, with vendors who assumed a woman wouldn't notice the fine print, with clients who wanted restoration hardware results on a Walmart budget. I knew how to hold my ground, but sitting in that conference room on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, watching the buyer's attorney slide the final agreement across the table, something shifted in my chest. 23 years of my life. Every early morning, every difficult client, every moment I'd questioned whether I was doing the right thing, all of it had led to this. $4.2 million. I kept the number quiet in my head the whole drive home. Didn't call anyone. Didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, watching the familiar streets of Naperville pass by. The coffee shop where I'd sketched my first real logo on a napkin. The hardware store where I used to spend entire Saturday mornings walking the aisles looking for inspiration. I had built something real in this town. Something that lasted. My husband, Raymond, worked about 20 minutes from our house at an architecture firm in the West Loop. We'd been together for 31 years, married for 28 of them. We had 2 adult children. Our son lived in Portland. Our daughter was in Denver with her husband, and our 2 grandchildren. Raymond and I had always said that once we both retired, we'd finally take that trip to Portugal we'd been talking about since our honeymoon. We'd always been planners like that. Always someday. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise him. That was my mistake, I suppose, though it doesn't feel quite right to call it that, because none of what happened was my fault. But I didn't call ahead. I just drove to his building, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked down the hall toward his office with a smile on my face and 4.2 million reasons to celebrate. His door was slightly open. That's what I remember most clearly. Just an inch or two? And before I even pushed it, I heard her. Not words, just laughter. A specific kind of laughter. Low, comfortable, the kind that doesn't perform for anyone. The kind that comes from a person who feels completely at home. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. Then I pushed the door open. She was sitting on the corner of his desk, her back half turned toward me, young, maybe 32, 33. Dark hair pulled back loosely. My husband was leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed and a grin on his face. I hadn't seen and I genuinely couldn't remember how long. When she turned and saw me, the smile disappeared. Raymond looked up a half-second later. "Joanna," he said. Just my name, nothing else. And in the way he said it, no surprise, no apology, just a kind of bracing. I understood that this was not the first time he'd needed to prepare himself for something. I looked at her, I looked at him, and I said very quietly, "I'll wait in the lobby." I don't know why I said that. I think part of me needed a moment to be somewhere that wasn't that room. She left within 5 minutes. I watched her walk through the lobby without looking at me. Raymond came out after her, straightening his jacket in that particular way he had when he was uncomfortable. We sat across from each other in a corner of the lobby on chairs that were too low to the ground and not designed for conversations like this one. "How long?" I said. He didn't ask what I meant. "About 2 years," he said. 2 years. I ran the math without meaning to. Our granddaughter's first birthday. The trip Raymond and I had taken to Charleston for our anniversary. The Christmas where he'd seemed distracted and I'd assumed it was work stress. 2 years' worth of ordinary days that had been, apparently, something else entirely underneath. "She works here?" I asked. "She's a junior architect. She'll be transferring to the Cincinnati office." He said it quickly, like it was a solution. That wasn't what I asked. He was quiet. I stood up. I told him I needed some time to think. I drove home alone, and I sat at my kitchen table. The same table where we'd helped our kids with homework, where we'd had 100 Sunday breakfasts, and I made a list. Not of grievances, not yet. I made a list of everything I knew for certain. I knew I had just sold my business for $4.2 million. I knew that business had been incorporated 2 years before Raymond and I were married, in 1994, when I was 31 years old and newly divorced from my first husband and determined to build something of my own. I knew that in Illinois, property acquired before marriage is generally considered non-marital property in a divorce proceeding. I knew I hadn't told Raymond about the sale yet, and I knew that before I said one more word to him about any of it, I needed to talk to an attorney. I called my friend Patrice that evening. She's a retired family law paralegal, not a lawyer herself, but she knew enough to confirm what I suspected, given that Hartley Home Interiors was established before our marriage, with documentation going back to 1994. And given that Raymond had no formal role in the business ever, the proceeds from the sale would likely be treated as non-marital property. Likely, not guaranteed. But likely, especially with good legal representation. I called an attorney first thing the next morning. Her name was Fiona Marsh, and she had been practicing family law in DuPage County for 26 years. She was calm and precise, and she asked me questions for 2 hours. At the end of those 2 hours, she said, "Don't move any money. Don't tell your husband the amount. Don't make any large purchases. Come back on Thursday and we'll talk about next steps." I did exactly what she said. Raymond came home that night as though things were normal, or trying to be. He made dinner, pasta from a jar, which was about the extent of his cooking, and he sat across from me and he said, "I want to fix this, Joanna." I nodded. I said I needed more time. What I didn't say was that I had already emailed my accountant, already started gathering documentation from my attorney, already quietly opened a separate checking account at a bank he didn't know I used. I wasn't angry yet. I want to be honest about that. The anger came later. In those first few days, I was mostly just clear. Clearer than I'd been in years, maybe. Like a fog had lifted and I could finally see the exact shape of things. Raymond kept saying he wanted to talk. I kept saying I needed space. This went on for about 2 weeks. And then one evening, he sat down across from me and said he'd heard from someone at work that I had sold my business. I looked at him. "Congratulations," he said. And the way he said it, careful, like he was testing the ground before putting his full weight down, told me everything I needed to know about what was really happening inside his head. "Thank you," I said. "That must have been a significant amount," he said. I took a sip of my coffee. "It was a fair price," I said. He waited. I didn't add anything. "Joanna," he said, "whatever happens between us, we built a life together. 31 years. I think we need to talk about things fairly." And there it was. That word, fairly, from a man who had spent 2 years being deeply, deliberately unfair to me. I kept my face very still. "My attorney will be in touch with yours," I said. "I think that's the right way to handle it." He blinked. "You have an attorney?" "I do." "Since when?" "Since I decided I needed one." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't want this to get adversarial." I set down my coffee cup. "Raymond," I said, "you had a 2-year affair with a woman you work with. You didn't end it. You didn't tell me. I found out by accident on what should have been one of the best days of my life. So I want you to understand that I'm not the one who made this adversarial." He didn't say anything after that. I moved into the guest room that night. I told my daughter and son the following weekend, separate calls, both of them hard. My son was mostly quiet and said he loved me. My daughter cried and said she'd never really understood why her father always seemed like he was somewhere else. That broke something open in me. I thought I was the only one who noticed. The divorce process took 9 months. Fiona was methodical and thorough. Raymond hired an attorney who, in their first letter to her, suggested that since Hartley Home Interiors had benefited from a stable marital home environment over the years, some portion of the proceeds could be argued as marital property. Fiona sent me a text after she received that letter. It said, "Standard move. Don't panic. Call me tomorrow." I called her the next morning. She walked me through the counter-argument. The business had been incorporated before the marriage with my own capital, that Raymond had never worked for the company, never contributed financially to it, that there was 23 years of clean documentation showing the business as solely mine. The argument his attorney was making had a name, something called active appreciation, and it applied in some cases but was difficult to prove when one spouse had no documented involvement in the business at all. Raymond had no documented involvement. He had come to my store's anniversary parties. He had eaten the catered food. That was the extent of it. We settled. He received what he was entitled to from our genuinely shared marital assets, the house equity, the joint retirement accounts, a portion of savings. It was not nothing. I won't pretend it was nothing. But the business proceeds remain mine, as Fiona had said they likely would. The house sold in the spring. I found a condo in the Lakeview neighborhood in Chicago. 2 bedrooms, high ceilings, a small balcony that looks out over the neighborhood. I stood in it the first time with afternoon light coming through the windows and thought, I can breathe here. My daughter and her family came to visit that first summer. My grandchildren ran through the empty rooms before my furniture arrived, their voices echoing, and I stood in the kitchen making grilled cheese sandwiches and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happy exactly, not yet, but free. I started taking a watercolor class on Tuesday evenings at a community studio about 6 blocks away. I am not particularly talented. The instructor, a retired art teacher named Lorraine, told me very kindly during my 3rd class that my trees looked like broccoli. I laughed harder than I had in months. I went back the next week. One of the women in my class, Vivienne, became a close friend quickly. She was 71, twice widowed, and had absolutely no patience for self-pity, mine or anyone else's. She had a way of listening to me talk about what had happened and then saying something so direct and unsentimental that it jolted me out of whatever spiral I'd started falling into. "He made a choice," she said once. "For 2 years, every single day, he made that choice. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. Stop trying to find the explanation that makes it make sense." I thought about that for weeks, because I had been trying to find the explanation. Replaying conversations, cataloging the moments I'd been distracted by work, wondering if I'd missed signs. Vivienne was right. I had been looking for a way to understand it that also, somehow, absorbed part of the blame. And there was no version of it that worked that way. My attorney filed everything in November. Raymond and I were officially divorced the following March. On the day it was finalized, I drove myself to a small French restaurant downtown that I had always loved and ordered a glass of good Burgundy and the duck confit. And I sat at a corner table by the window and watched people walk by on the street outside. A couple across the room was having an argument. Quiet, controlled, the kind couples have in public when they're trying not to make a scene. I watched them for a few minutes. I didn't feel sad watching them. I felt something more like recognition. That's how it looks from the outside, I thought. That's what we probably look like sometimes. near the end. After dinner, I walked to the lake. It was cold, and the wind came off the water sharp and bright. And I stood there for a long time with my coat pulled tight, and I thought about the 23 years I'd spent building something, and the way it had felt to sign my name on those sale documents, and the feeling in my chest in the parking garage after that specific mix of grief and relief and pride. I had built something real, something that could not be taken from me. Not by Raymond, not by the 2 years of what he'd done, not by any attorney's letter suggesting otherwise. I still think about the moment I pushed open his office door sometimes, the laughter I heard before I saw anything, the way it had stopped. I think about it less than I used to. Vivienne and I have a standing Tuesday class. Afterward, we usually go to a Vietnamese place around the corner and split a pot of tea and talk about everything and nothing. Last week, she said she thought my trees were getting better. I told her Lorraine still looks skeptical. We both laughed. My grandchildren are coming in August. I've bought them matching sets of watercolor paints, which Vivienne says is either charming or dangerous, and probably both. My son is flying in from Portland for a long weekend. My daughter is talking about all of us going somewhere together next year. Maybe New England in the fall, maybe somewhere farther. I keep thinking about Portugal, not with Raymond. That version of the dream belongs to a different chapter. But maybe, someday, alone, or with people I choose, at a table outside somewhere with the kind of sun that feels entirely different from home, with a glass of something cold and the particular feeling of having arrived somewhere I meant to go. I'm not there yet, but I can see it from here, and for the first time in a long time, I believe I'll get there. That feels like enough. More than enough, actually. It feels like the beginning of something. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to pick it apart looking for someone to blame. I did enough of that in the first few months, but to actually look at it clearly, the way you can only do once the anger settles and you're left with just the shape of things. What I keep coming back to is this. Raymond's choices and my choices both had consequences. His were obvious. 2 years of decisions, made daily, that slowly hollowed out something I thought was solid. But mine mattered too, and not in the way I first feared. For a long time I wondered if I'd been inattentive, too wrapped up in the business, not present enough. Maybe, probably some of that was true. But here's what I've come to understand. Being imperfect in a marriage is not the same as earning betrayal. Those are two completely different things, and I spent too many nights confusing them. What actually protected me, what I didn't fully appreciate until it was over, was every quiet, unglamorous decision I had made over 23 years to build something of my own. Not to protect myself from Raymond specifically. I hadn't been thinking about divorce in 1994 when I incorporated Hartley Home Interiors. I was thinking about survival, about proving something to myself after my first marriage fell apart. But those decisions, made for entirely different reasons, turned out to be the thing that kept me standing when everything else shifted. That's the part that stays with me. You can't always see in the moment which choices are going to matter. You just do the honest work. You keep your name on things. You document what's yours, not out of suspicion but out of self-respect. And then life, which doesn't care at all about your plans, does what it does, and either you have something to stand on or you don't. Fiona told me once during one of our longer meetings that the clients who struggled most in divorce proceedings were the ones who had let everything become ours without keeping track of what had been mine to begin with. Not because they were naive, because they trusted, and trust is not a flaw. But trust without documentation, trust without self-awareness, trust that forgets its own history, That's where people got hurt. I didn't forget my history. Not completely. And Vivienne, who has buried 2 husbands and built a life anyway, twice, reminded me that survival isn't luck. It's a habit. It's every small decision to stay sharp, stay honest, know your own worth before someone else tries to define it for you. Raymond knew exactly what he was doing when his demeanor shifted the moment he heard the word sold. That told me everything I needed to know about what those 31 years had meant to him, at least toward the end. And oddly, that clarity was a gift. It made the decision simple. I don't carry bitterness about it. I want to be honest about that. Not performing forgiveness, but genuinely not interested in spending whatever years I have left being angry at a man who made his own choices and now lives with them. What I carry instead is something quieter and more useful. The knowledge that I built something real, that it held, and that I am still here. That's the whole lesson, I think. Build things that hold. Know what's yours. And when the ground moves, because it will, one way or another, have something underneath you that you put there yourself.